She won the gold medal, she stood on top of the world, and then she sat down for a Rolling Stone interview and said something that stopped the entire internet completely cold. An Olympic champion, a 20-year-old who had just made history at the Milano Cortina Winter Games, finally ready to tell the world what was actually happening behind the curtain of elite figure skating. The journalist asked about her training regimen, specifically about water, and Alysa Liu did not pause, did not hedge, did not soften it for an audience she knew was watching. Yes, she said, they told her water weight was the problem, that she should not drink water, that she should gargle it instead so she would not retain the fluid in her body. She even laughed a little when she said it, not the laugh of someone who finds something funny, but the specific laugh of a person looking back at something that happened to them and finally allowing themselves to call it what it was. That word, gargle, is all it took to ignite a firestorm across every platform simultaneously, because the image it creates is so viscerally wrong that no amount of competitive context can soften its meaning. To understand why this specific moment landed with the weight it did, you need the full picture of who Alysa Liu actually is and what she was being asked to sacrifice during the years those coaches were making decisions about her body. She grew up in the Bay Area, daughter of Arthur Liu, a man who famously taught himself competitive figure skating as an adult, specifically so he could coach his own daughter. That level of dedication runs through the entire family bloodline. She was landing quadruple jumps before she was a teenager, 4 rotations in the air, the kind of technical content that most professional male skaters struggle to execute cleanly, doing them in junior competition before she had fully grown into her body. She became the youngest U.S. figure skating champion in history at 13, landing jumps that women were not supposed to be able to land, redefining the technical ceiling of the sport before most kids her age had their first part-time job. Elite figure skating, like elite gymnastics, has a dark side that the glitter and the sequins and the television production hide from the audience watching at home. The weight requirements, the dietary restrictions, the culture of total control over young female bodies. Alysa Liu lived inside that system from the time she was a child, and sitting across from Rolling Stone journalist Alex Morris 40 minutes into a wide-ranging interview, she was finally ready to describe what that system actually looked like from the inside. The gargle line broke the internet, but the full context of the Rolling Stone exchange is what transforms it from a shocking quote into a documented description of systematic abuse disguised as coaching methodology. Morris framed it directly. You were literally told you could not drink water. Everything was monitored. Everything was controlled. And Alysa confirmed it without hesitation, without diplomatic softening, without the protective language athletes usually deploy when discussing their coaches publicly. Yes, she said, and then described the specific instruction, the exact rationale offered. Water weight, they called it, as though the solution to water weight in a heavily active athletic body is to replace hydration with gargling. The calm with which she described it is the detail that cuts deepest, because the composure told you everything about how normalized this was in that environment. Not a rare horror story, not an exceptional incident, just Tuesday in the training rink. When something abusive is described with the matter-of-fact tone of someone recounting a routine, it means the routine was genuinely abusive. It means the person describing it was inside a system where this was simply how things worked, and no one around them treated it as extraordinary. That normalization is the specific quality that makes the culture of elite figure skating more dangerous than individual bad actors. It is a systemic environment where wrong things become invisible through repetition until someone finally says the word out loud. Here is the scientific reality that makes the water restriction not just cruel, but specifically, documentably, scientifically backward in every direction simultaneously, and the coaches who issued these instructions should have known this. Sports scientists and nutritionists have understood for decades that restricting water intake in heavily active athletes does not reduce body fat, does not create a leaner physique, and does not produce the competitive outcome the restriction is supposedly designed to achieve. What it does is cause dehydration, and when the human body detects dehydration, its biological response is to hold on to every drop it possesses as a defense mechanism against the threat of further loss. Restricting water in an athlete who is training at the elite level does not produce less water weight. It produces more water retention, more inflammation, more compromised performance, and more risk of heat exhaustion and organ stress. The coaches who told Alysa Liu to gargle her water were not making a hard choice in pursuit of competitive excellence. They were making a cruel choice that was simultaneously producing the exact opposite of the physical result they claimed to be targeting. Wrong and cruel simultaneously. That phrase echoed across the internet for days after the clip went viral, because the combination is the specific quality that removes any possibility of defending the instruction as misguided but well-intentioned coaching practice. When Rolling Stone posted the clip on March 7th, the internet's response was immediate, global, and did not stay within sports communities or figure skating audiences for more than a few minutes before it went everywhere simultaneously. Sports journalists, former athletes, pediatricians, nutritionists, and fans from every corner of the watching world were posting reactions within hours, and the consensus across all those different communities was remarkably consistent. The tamer reactions called it child abuse, a phrase that sounds extreme until you examine what is actually being described, which is adults telling a child not to drink water during brutal physical training lasting hours per day. Former gymnasts began sharing their own stories in the comment sections and on their own platforms, and figure skaters from previous generations started opening up about the weight restrictions, food monitoring, and psychological pressure they had experienced in silence for years. What started as a single quote from a Rolling Stone interview became a collective unlocking. Dozens of former elite athletes describing similar experiences, similar instructions, similar environments where the body was treated as a problem to be controlled rather than a human system to be supported. The most important structural detail in this entire story is the one that almost nobody is discussing with the directness it deserves. Alysa Liu won the gold medal despite these conditions, not because of them. She landed those quadruple jumps, executed those spins, delivered a technically and artistically extraordinary Olympic program while being coached inside a system that was actively undermining her biological ability to perform at the level she was being asked to reach. Whatever ceiling she hit in competition was her ceiling with compromised hydration, monitored calories, and the specific psychological weight of being a young girl inside a system that communicated daily that her body in its natural state was not acceptable. The question that follows from that documented reality is not rhetorical, and it is not comfortable. What would she have been capable of? What would any of these athletes be capable of if they had been properly fueled and properly hydrated throughout their entire competitive development? Elite athletes built on proper nutritional science, psychological support, and coaching systems that treat the body as an engine to be optimized rather than a liability to be disciplined through restriction. That version of Alysa Liu may never have existed because the system never tried to produce it. The gold medal she won is extraordinary. The gold medal she might have won with proper support is a question that the sport's institutional culture made sure would never be answered. What Alysa did in that Rolling Stone interview was not just brave in the abstract way that word gets used to describe athletes who say difficult things. It was specifically, consequentially necessary in a way that has immediate real-world implications. The 12-year-olds and 14-year-olds currently inside elite figure skating programs, the girls who dream of standing where she stood, are in those systems right now, while this conversation is happening around them from the outside. They deserve coaches who understand the basic biological science of hydration, who know that a properly fueled body performs better than a dehydrated one, who were educated on sports nutrition at some point during their coaching careers. They deserve a sport whose institutional culture values athletes as whole human beings first and competitive vehicles second, where the gap between those two framings is understood and explicitly chosen rather than unconsciously defaulted into because that is how it has always been done. The fact that Alysa had to win an Olympic gold medal and sit down with Rolling Stone before anyone was going to listen to what she described is the specific institutional failure this moment should be forcing the sport to confront at every level of its structure. Role models who reach the top of the world and use the platform to say clearly, without embarrassment, that what happened to them was crazy and insane and should never happen to anyone after them. That is the most valuable thing a champion can do with the attention they have earned. The cultural pattern this story is part of is not unique to figure skating, and it is not unique to 2026. It is a documented feature of elite aesthetic sports that prioritizes the visual presentation of the female body over the physical health of the female athlete. Gymnastics produced Aly Raisman, Simone Biles, and dozens of other athletes who described similar environments. Monitoring, restriction, weigh-ins, comments about bodies made to young girls by adults who held complete authority over their competitive futures. The specific tools vary across sports and coaches, but the underlying structure is consistent. Young female athletes in environments where their bodies are evaluated by judges or audiences have historically been subjected to adult management of their eating and hydration as a standard coaching practice. The science has been available for decades to demonstrate that these practices are counterproductive, that dehydration impairs performance, that caloric restriction in actively training athletes causes muscle loss and reduces competitive output rather than improving it. The gap between what sports science has established and what coaching culture has practiced inside these environments is not an accident of ignorance. It is a gap maintained by institutional culture that has been slow to reform because the athletes experiencing it have historically had no safe platform to describe it. Alysa Liu just handed every young athlete currently inside these systems a gold medal decorated example of someone who described it plainly, on record, in a major publication and called it exactly what it was without softening it for the audience or protecting the people responsible for it. The coaches who gave these instructions have not been named publicly by Alysa in the Rolling Stone interview, and the details of who specifically issued which directives remain inside the private history of her competitive development. But the absence of named individuals does not reduce the institutional accountability this moment demands from the sport of figure skating, from USA Figure Skating as the governing body, and from the coaching certification structures that produced and continue to certify the people working with young athletes. If coaches are advising young female athletes not to drink water during intense training in 2026, after decades of sports science establishing the opposite protocol, the problem is not individual bad actors who slipped through the system. The problem is a system that never built the accountability structures required to identify and remove those practices. USA Figure Skating's response to this moment, or the absence of a substantive response, will tell the entire sport something specific about whether the institutional priority is protecting competitive culture or protecting athletes, and those two things are not always aligned. The anti-doping and abuse prevention frameworks that have been developed in the years since the Larry Nassar case in gymnastics were supposed to represent a broader cultural shift in how elite sports organizations treat the welfare of young athletes in their programs.
Whether that shift actually reached the coaching culture inside figure skating at the level where daily training decisions are made is a question this moment is forcing into public view in a way that cannot be quietly managed back into the background. Alysa Liu's greatest competitive achievement is the gold medal she won in Milan at 20 years old, ending 24 years of drought in America and delivering a performance the world watched and fell completely in love with. But the moment she sat across from Rolling Stone and said, "Yes, they told me not to drink water, gargle it instead," that specific act of public honesty may ultimately matter more to the sport and to the people in it than any medal she ever wins. Every former athlete who heard that interview and finally felt permission to describe their own experience, every current athlete who heard it and understood for the first time that what was happening to them was not normal, every parent who heard it and started asking different questions about their child's program, those are the downstream consequences of one 20-year-old telling the truth. The reach of that honesty extends far beyond the sport of figure skating and far beyond the specific details of water and weight. It reaches into every institution where young people's bodies are managed by adults with authority and no external accountability. She did not set out to start a movement when she sat down for that interview. She was talking to a journalist about her life, being warm and funny and refreshingly open, and then she answered a question about water with the specific honesty of someone who no longer has any reason to protect the people responsible. That is the Alysa Liu effect operating in a completely different dimension than the chart-topping and the medal winning. Not the effect of a performer on an audience, but the effect of a survivor on a system that was counting on her silence.